Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to review Lanzerath Ridge from DVG Games, designed by David Thompson and Nils Johansson. Now this is a tactical World War II solitaire game where you play the role of around 20 US soldiers defending a ridge at the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, and you're trying to survive waves of German attackers who are trying to take your position out. So a very brief overview of gameplay. As US forces, you've got about 20 troops and you're trying to defend your ridge from any German troops penetrating your ridge. And there's other ways you can lose by having too many casualties and things like that too. But the essential defense is you're trying to survive 4 waves of German attackers. And each wave of attackers consists of anywhere from 24 to 27 actions that the Germans are going to take in stages of 3. So the Germans are going to basically act on 3 cards that are going to dictate what they're going to do. Sometimes the troops are going to move forward, sometimes they're going to fire mortars at you, sometimes they're going to fire machine guns at you, and things like that. Then after the Germans do their 3 actions, as the US forces, you get to do 5 actions. It could be move, it could be fire, it could be reload, it could be call for artillery support, it could be to assist one of your other soldiers and things like that. So there's lots of things that you're trying to pick from as the US forces. And gameplay goes through these 4 different stages of action. If you can survive all 4 stages, you win the game. And so in essence, it's a very simple, basic game where you're trying to kind of do whatever you can to stop the Germans from knocking out your defensive position. So tactical, gritty World War II combat game. Okay, now let's get to the fun part. Let's jump into our review. Normally I do a power review, but this game is complex and nuanced enough that I don't think a power review does it justice. So we're just going to start right in with the full meaty review. Now, a couple things about this game. I think this game has a number of layers, levels if you would, 3 different levels to play, and then there's a couple of aspects to play. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those because I think that has a bearing on my overall review of the game. First up, let's talk a little bit about the dual nature of the game, because I think in many ways this game is a hybrid that sits with one foot in kind of wargamey and grognardy tactics and mechanics, and the other half is in a little bit more of kind of an abstract Euro-esque puzzler state of siege type of game. Let me elaborate a little bit. So one of the things I really liked about this game are the wargaming aspects of the game. First up, it drives you right into the history of the event. It details the events of that day. There's a historical supplement that you can get in PDF form or in printed form that details the action of the day, tells the stories of the soldiers, how the combat unfolded, some of the preface to the battle, what happened to the soldiers after the battle. The map is absolutely gorgeous and just pulls you right into that morning in December and the frosty, cold, snowy landscape and just brings you right there. Where pictures were available of the individual soldiers, they're on the counters, they've got the soldiers' names on the counters. This just really tells, from the American perspective, the story of this battle, and it pulls you right into the events of that day. I love war games that elaborate and enrich and just tell that historical side to the game that you're playing. This game does a marvelous job on that. Some of the war game mechanics too, I think, are absolutely brilliant. For example, the kind of range calculations and how much the to-hit variables are, the way they're just layered into the map, and the fields of fire and the lines of sight that are just layered into the map is a brilliant execution of how to take what could have been like 6 pages of rules and distill them down basically into a couple of paragraphs that make executing the game super simple and easy to do. It's magnificently executed. It makes things so easy to play. I really loved how that was just layered into the game. This is a very accessible war game, and one of the reasons why is because of that design feature right there. I also love the machine guns, how the ammunition works, how the rates of fire works, how the overheating works, how the break problems could happen with machine guns. I think that was a really fun and detailed and nice and gritty tactical way to carry that out. It really enriches the gameplay, and it's just fun to play. And the machine guns played an important role in the battle, so the way it's figured into the game, getting those right is key to doing well, and the game does it really brilliantly. So those wargaming aspects, which was my anticipation for the game, were just done so well. And that's one aspect of the game. Now, there's a second aspect of the game, and that's kind of the not wargaming elements of it, if you would. There's kind of an abstract puzzler side to the game. And this side caught me off guard a little bit. This side here is, to kind of elaborate a little bit, some of the soldiers' abilities fall, I would think, in this category. You have an assist ability, which basically can reinvigorate a soldier after they've performed a major action in a turn. And when soldiers fire in a turn, they can't do anything else that turn unless they get assisted and brought back to kind of an energetic state. There's an inspire action whereby if you have a soldier from the same squad or a commander in your firing position with you, you get to use 2 dice instead of 1 die when you're firing. And that inspiration aspect kind of carries over, and it's a big key part of gameplay too. And then commanders likewise have a command aspect where they can reinvigorate 3 soldiers that are either in their firing position or in an adjacent firing position. And while these work from kind of a gameplay mechanic, what I did struggle to see was to paint in my mind's eye of how they're working out in the scope of a battle, right? So you end up with some soldiers who really are kind of you don't want to burn through them because you want to keep their inspiration ability there for the longest time. And so what I struggled with a little bit is seeing how that folds out in the battle there. Like, what are they doing, right? Kind of thing. So it starts to deviate from a war game, and it gets a little bit gamey and a little bit kind of abstract and a little bit more of a puzzler. Not that that aspect isn't fun, but it's very different from that wargamey side of the game. So that was one place. But the place where I think it really starts to kind of shift away from a wargaming element is in the way the card decks play out. And I think that's an important part of the game, and it's also going to be important when we talk about the different levels. So in each round, you've got 4 basic waves of German attackers. And the first wave has 24 cards, and the next 3 waves have 27 cards. And they're going to dictate, again, where the soldiers appear on the map, whether machine guns fire, and all these kinds of things. What happens as you play the game, though, is that those cards remain fairly static. And so what I found after the first time I played the game, after the first time I saw a particular wave of cards, I had a vastly increased sense of knowledge, and that sense of knowledge made the game more of an abstract puzzler and less of a war game. And I'll try not to give spoilers away, but I'll try to say this in a way that doesn't give spoilers away. But an example, in certain rounds are going to have attackers out on the flanks. And so you need to position your defenders to defend those flanks. You also kind of need to know, knowing how many of those attackers on each flank are going to appear is key too. So if you know beforehand, after you've played through a round once, you know exactly how many attackers are going to appear out on the flanks, if there's any at all, and you can position your defensive forces with that knowledge. And to me, that creates kind of an element where it's not how you would defend, right? You're not going to defend this ridge with perfect knowledge of where the attackers are going to come. And furthermore, because in the rounds you know specifically how many they're going to be in certain situations, in certain key places, what it leads you to do is, you could have a certain number of attackers appear out on a flank. You could have one standing right in front of your foxhole after the 3rd kind of round of playing cards, and you could say, no, I don't have to shoot at that guy because there's going to be no more attackers out on that flank, so I can just leave him standing there for the whole rest of the wave. Now you could imagine, I suppose, in your mind's eye, the guy gets kind of frozen in fear and they're panicking and stuff like that. But it results in a situation where you can position forces and act in ways that felt it really kind of drifts away from that wargaming side of it. So these abstract puzzler ways, the last thing I will say too about the puzzle, is that the default loss condition. So one of the default loss conditions, if a single German attacker breaches your defensive line and survives the round in one of your defensive positions, it's game over. So you can be kind of fighting and doing really, really well and kind of defending, but you have no casualties, ammunition's conserved on your machine guns, you're doing really, really well, and then a sequence of cards can have one German penetrate one foxhole where you perhaps might have a guy that's already exhausted so he can't do anything, and you can't move someone in to take that defender out, and it's game over and you lose. Now, historically, 19 of the 20 defenders, I think, survived. One was killed, and they surrendered once they got outflanked. So I suppose there's historical precedent for that, but it feels a little bit disjoint, again, from that wargaming side. When a single attacker penetrates your defense, and then you surrender. And so that part there kind of highlights, I think, a little bit of that gamey aspect to it. Now, to be totally honest, when I started playing the game, I was expecting the Wargame side of it. So it was a little bit of a shock when I saw the gameplay drift into this abstract nature. And so that caught me off guard. I kind of had to reshift some of my perceptions about the game. But, so we have those two aspects, and I think the next thing we want to talk about is the levels of the game. Because the way these two aspects, this wargaming aspect and the abstract puzzler kind of aspect, play out depend on what level of the game you're playing at. So let me explain a little bit more about that, about the levels to the game, because that, I think, influences this hybrid nature of the game, if you would. So the first time you play the game, if you haven't looked through those attack decks beforehand, you have no idea where the attackers are coming. You have no idea how many times the machine guns are going to fire. You have no idea how many times the mortars are going to fire and where they're going to go. It's just chaos. And that, to me, felt like when you're playing that way the first time through a wave, you've got this side of the game, that war game side of the game, kind of inflates and gets bigger, and that abstract puzzler side of the game gets smaller and it shrinks a little bit. And I really liked the first time I played through the waves, right? So that part's there. It just felt really gritty, tactical, and like a war game. Once you've played through the waves, though, I felt like the card deck was static enough that it just led you to taking a lot of kind of non-realistic actions because that puzzler aspect of the game got a lot bigger. You know, it's things like, okay, I know even though there's 4 German machine guns set up defensively to fire at our, set up attacking to fire at our positions, I don't have to fire at the machine guns because I know they're not going to fire anymore. Or, you know, again, the part I mentioned, I know exactly how many attackers are going to be out on the flanks. So once I've killed 3 of them, 2 of them, I don't have to kill anymore. We're done with the attackers on the flanks and I can concentrate on everybody else. So the gameplay then, that wargaming aspect wanes and the puzzler aspect waxes. And to be totally honest, once I finished that second level of the game where I'd beaten the game and I felt like I knew what was there, that card deck is static to the point that I felt like I was kind of done with the game. So I played the game once, I lost on the second wave, and I played again, and that was the one we did the video series for, and I made it through to the victory condition. And once I got done, I didn't really feel inspired to play again, and it felt a little bit disappointing to me because I felt like there should have been greater depth. Now, I should say too, you know, I think if you're coming to this game from a wargaming background, those wargaming tactics and strategies that you kind of need to understand and use well, you know, fields of fire, lines of sight, where you want to position your machine guns, how you're going to work these different attributes of the soldiers, defensive lines and reactions and stuff like that. I think if you're coming from it from a wargaming aspect, once you kind of get those down, the game played out pretty transparently to me. I think if you're coming to it from a Eurogame aspect and aren't familiar with war games, it's going to take more time to kind of wrap your head around that side of the game. Because I've seen people posting on Board Game Geek saying, wow, I've played a lot of times, it's really hard, I'm not figuring it out. And I suspect those players are coming more from the Euro side of it, whereas if you're coming from the wargaming side of it, you're probably going to have more success early on and get to that win condition pretty early on. And by no means I'm saying I'm not a great wargamer. Okay, so I'm not trying to brag or anything like that. There are some games I just struggle with tremendously. This one felt pretty transparent to me in terms of how you play it out. So again, once I got done with that second level where I knew it was in the different card decks and stuff like that, the game felt static and I felt like I was kind of done with it. I said, yeah, there's, you know, it was good. It was maybe 4 hours of play and I felt like, yeah, I didn't want to play again. Now, in the game's defense, there are victory point levels, right? So you can win, say, and have like win by 5 points. You can dial in, you can transfer intelligence to the back, to the headquarters and stuff like that. That can get you more victory points, and you can you can scrap your equipment and destroy your equipment to get more victory points. But those, for whatever reason, those didn't really inspire me. I felt like once I survived the 4 waves, I had beaten the game, and playing again to try to get more points would almost be like playing a football game to try to win by 2 touchdowns instead of 1 touchdown, and it didn't really motivate me to play more. So I have to be totally honest, I'm not a huge fan of that second level coming at this game from a wargamer aspect, because I felt like the hybrid nature of it went more to the abstract puzzler, and it missed the opportunity to stay in that wargamer category. This, however, is my taste, and I'm going to talk about who I think this game is absolutely perfect for at even that second level. But The story's not done yet because there's a third level to the game, okay? So I thought, I owed it to myself, I wanted to do a fair review of the game, and there's another level to the game. There's a deck of what are called tactics cards. And the way the tactics cards work are you take a certain number of them, not all of them, and that's important. You take a certain number of them out, one for each round in each wave. So if there are 27 cards, you're going to have 9 rounds because you're pulling 3 each time in a wave. And so each time before you perform those 3 German actions, you deploy one of these tactics cards. And the tactics cards do a lot of things. It might mean your machine guns are firing twice instead of once. It might mean you're going to enact a card 2 times instead of 1 time. It might mean you put 2 attackers in a spot instead of 1 attacker. It might mean your attackers, any attacker that would come in the center, instead is going to shift out to the flanks. So mortars might fire differently and more often and things like that. So these cards can be anywhere, depending on how they combine with the cards you draw in the wave. They can be anywhere from totally devastating to pretty much automatic loss, automatic loss conditions, to having absolutely no impact at all. Because if you draw a tactics card, for example, that influences how the machine guns behave, and then in the course of playing the deck, that wave out, that next portion of the wave, you don't draw any machine gun cards, then it doesn't change gameplay at all, right? So sometimes there's no impact, and other times it's a monumental impact. And the range usually falls somewhere in between. So I said, okay, I'm going to play the game one more time with the tactics cards involved. And I played it with the tactics cards involved, and I really liked it. It was really fun. It adds in a layer of ambiguity, chaos, unpredictability, fog of war that forces you as the defender to be able to react to a lot more in different circumstances. And that felt like now the wargaming element of the game kind of waxes again, it gets a little bit bigger, and that abstract puzzler element is still there because you're going to know how many times the machine guns fire. You're going to know roughly where things occur and stuff like that. So they're still there, but it shrank to the point where I felt like, oh, this is really cool with the wargaming aspect. Now, to be fair, at this level too, you're going to get the cards are going to beat you no matter how well you play in a number of games you play, right? So it's got this certain like solitaire card aspect to it. Like sometimes the hand is just going to make you lose because if you draw the right tactics card with the right combination of the cards that you pull in the next turn, you can often just, no matter what you've done, you're just going to lose. So that if that's going to bother you, that's probably not the level you want to play at. But I kind of like that because it heightened the tension. And to be fair, the game, I think once you get to that level and you've played enough to get to that level, you're going to be executing the rounds pretty quickly. So it's about, I think, maybe a 45-minute experience. I think, excuse me, by that point in time, I think the game says here, doesn't list the length, but I think inside it says like an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. But I felt like at that level, you know what you're doing and you're playing much faster. So it's like a 45-minute experience. And so an automatic loss condition in a 45-minute experience is kind of like, ah, darn it, I lost, kind of thing like that. But I really like that third level. I love the experience. It's, do I wish it were more wargamey? Yes, but it's really fun, and for that reason, this is a keeper. I want it on myself, and I will come back to it and play it again because that experience with the tactics cards, with the ambiguity, the fog of war, and that balance between the two mechanisms, the two natures of the game, evens out really well. And that tactics cards makes it hard again. And so you're going to lose, and you're going to be forced to think in different ways. And I like the intellectual challenge that level brought. Now, there is an elite level where you pull 2 tactics cards. I feel like that's probably going to be too hard. At some point, I might try that, but I felt like that's almost like an insane level of difficulty because one level of tactics cards pretty much is going to have a couple things in there that can really mess you up in a game. I can't imagine playing at that elite level where you're doing 2 tactics cards for each wave, each portion of each wave. I mean, that's just nutsy stuff. But yes, so bottom line, I really liked that level. This was a very enjoyable game once I got to that level. Although, again, going back to it, I'm not a fan of that second level for me and what I was hoping to get out of the game. So now, that's everything about the game. Let's go to kind of a final summation of it. I like the game a lot. It's not my favorite war game, but it's definitely a keeper. It's one I know I will come back to and play, kind of like, it'd be fun to play that again for an hour. Because it plays fast, the rules are brilliantly written, and the gameplay is so accessible. I think I looked in the rules a few times, the first couple waves I played and stuff like that. There's a little bit of subtleties, and I'm not going to call it fiddliness, but a little bit of subtleties between kind of how those assist mechanics work, when they can be used, and how they have to be used among squads, and that command rating and inspiration and stuff stuff like that, when you can use it and when you can't use it. It's easy to make some mistakes in there, so I was checking those a few times. But once I did that, you almost never have to refer to the rule book. It's really an easy game to play. And so, yes, I liked it. I do wish, for me, as a wargamer, I wish it were more wargaming. I'm thinking more of like By Stealth and See, which I think is just a masterful David Thompson design of a wargaming, accessible wargaming experience. And so I wish it were more that, but I like it, I enjoy it at that third level, that tactics level. That level is really fun to play at. Having said that, this is the important thing. I think this is perhaps the best, or one of the best, certainly, games for people who haven't played a war game before, especially if you're coming from one of that abstract Eurogamer background kind of thing. If you're looking to introduce someone to war games, I think this is a brilliant game to do it. It is super accessible, the rules are really easy to process, and that half of the game that's wargamey and the history that you get and you kind of experience as you're playing the game and learning about it, for someone who's new to war games, I think that's going to be really challenging to kind of wrap your head around and figure out. It's going to take longer depth of play, and I think as you work through those levels in the game, it's going to be a fantastic experience. It's sense of history, you got Battle of the Bulge. It's a popular thing in Western culture, at least especially from the US perspective of World War II history. So there's that element there. And that Euro foundation that sits, this aspect that sits on the other side, I think is going to lay a really good foundation to make the wargaming stuff more accessible. So I can't think of this might be my top, or certainly one of my top war games to recommend for people who haven't played war games before. So accessible, so easy to play, and it allows you to delve into this wargaming aspect as you still kind of stand on solid ground with the other abstract puzzler types of event. You could really, I think, use this as kind of a segue game or a gateway game into wargaming for people that might be inclined to play. There you have it, a full review of Lanzerath Ridge from David Thompson and Nils Johansson, and published by Verssen Games. If you'd like to see a link to the unboxing, I'll put it up here. If you'd like to see a link to the beginning of our gameplay episodes, I'll put it up here as well. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Have a great day.